So yeah, wonderful to be here today, and appreciate being invited to talk kind of about net metering. I'm going to keep it very, very high level, and then John will jump more into the policies and kind of how things are looking currently in the Missouri net metering policy that we're working on at MoSEA. So a little bit about Guarantee Electrical. We were founded in 1902 to wire the World's Fair in St. Louis. We are one of the original contractors that founded the IBEW Local 1 and operate with about 1,000 electricians out of the St. Louis area. And then about 200 support staff. We have offices in Colorado, a satellite office in California, and one in Illinois as well. And then we just recently transitioned to 100% ESOP. So we're a fully employee-owned company. So a little bit of a long history there of Guarantee working in the area. What I want to run over is net metering. What is it good for? Why do solar people kind of advocate for it? Net metering history, how we got to where we are, impacts of what a project ROI looks like with different net metering policies. We'll talk about the example in New Mexico, currently what's going on in Illinois, and then some of the sales process impacts of what net metering looks like and what next steps are. So net metering, what is it good for? Well, this is probably pretty high level. Just as a quick judge of the group here, who interacts with net metering or interconnection paperwork on a regular basis by a raise of hands? So maybe about 5–10% of the room here. So at the essence, solar only works when the sun shines, right? So we have to have some kind of storage device, or in essence, we're using the grid to store that power during the day when we're not using it. And then we're going to use that at night when we need the power to turn on lights, or at other times when we have higher demand than what the solar is able to produce. There being less sun in the winter than there is in the summer obviously adds some issues to reliability for solar as a production. And then we need electricity when we need it. That comes into the demand side of it. If we go in and flip all our lights on in the morning and the sun's not shining, where's that power coming from? That's where the grid reliance comes in and why we need to be tied to the grid. So in theory, the grid is the best battery that we could possibly have, right? There's no perfect machine in the world. And so batteries aren't 100% efficient. And the grid, if you look at a one-to-one net metering policy, which is a lot of what solar industry pushes for, that inherently is kind of a perfect machine. So I would say that it's a little bit of an over ask from the solar industry to say that we want 100% perfect machine being our battery storage of the grid. And so what does that relationship look like? And that's how policies kind of developed over time, a negotiation back and forth of how we can use this battery or in the grid. Some of the benefits, though, to the grid that they get from the solar is, the power is coming at the high peak of the day. It's hot and sunny outside. Everybody's ACs are flipping on. That's when solar is usually producing at its peak. So there's some both benefits to each other there for having that net metering interconnection. So a little bit of history. First net metering policy was in Minnesota in 1983. In the 90s, there was kind of a big wave of expansion of solar. There was at that point, I think there was about 20 or so states that had kind of adopted it. And then the big one was in 2005, the Energy Policy Act, which required public utilities to offer net metering upon customer request. However, because energy policy is done on a state level, there was no real true definition of what net metering would be from a federal level. And so that's been left up to interpretation across the country and across the utilities of how we define what net metering is. And that's where we're still today, is actively defining that and negotiating back and forth over what that looks like. 2010, there's about 40 states that adopted solar, and I got a map on the next slide that'll look over that. And then in about 2020, the policy started shifting back from this one-to-one relationship into more of like what we call net billing, or sign of different outcomes of net metering that would be less favorable to the solar owner and more favorable to the utility. So here's a kind of a general map of where we landed in 2023 for the state. You can see it's kind of a patchwork of different net metering policies. The one we'll be highlighting here is New Mexico, which is a true net metering, kind of the dark blue. We have Illinois, which I'll talk a little bit about how that's phasing away even in Illinois. And then you can see there's we have net billing, which I'll talk a little bit about, and then kind of different variations of that throughout the whole country. So net metering impacts on ROI for a solar really is like, how do we get a one-to-one relationship? For every kilowatt hour that I pass out to the grid, I'm going to want a kilowatt hour back at the same retail value. And even to take monetary exchange out of it and look at it just a kilowatt per kilowatt hour swap, right? So there's things like annual true up versus monthly true up. The solar people will say, hey, we want annual true up. That allows for the seasonality of solar to be able to produce more in the summer, carry some of those extra credits over into the winter. We want a one-to-one exchange. So like I said, everything kilowatt hour goes out, I get to be able to take a kilowatt hour back. There's net billing is a kind of a different approach. That's what we have in a lot of Missouri and a lot of utilities across the country. So instead of a kilowatt to kilowatt hour swap, you're giving me a kilowatt at a wholesale or retail rate when I put it out onto the grid, and then I'm getting charged full retail rate for that kilowatt hour when I need to use it, depending on time of use and that different aspect. Usually net billing ties up to truing up financially at the end of the month. So there's kind of an even exchange within the month. At the end of the month, any credits that you have left over get put into that retail exchange. That carries over to the next month, and then you can carry that throughout the year, and they true up at the end of the year. You can usually select between October and April. Traditionally, solar likes to select for April, simply because we're going to carry those credits into the winter. Net metering is definitely an incentive. So when I'm looking at different markets to go out in the country, we work nationally. The net metering policy is a lot of what I spend time researching, because that has a huge impact on what the ROI for the system would be. You can take on kind of one scale, getting maybe over the lifetime of a system, say $100,000 worth of energy credits for it. And on the other end, that same system with a different net metering policy could have about $400,000 worth of net metering credits that would be applied to the return on investment. There's even, in some net metering policies and interconnections, there's financial restrictions. So there's a lot of co-ops in Illinois that do not allow for power purchase agreements. Currently in the state of Missouri, we don't allow power purchase agreements, but even in utilities, they're now starting to mandate what kind of financial mechanism or ownership mechanism for the solar system can have within the interconnection paperwork or net metering paperwork. And then design requirements can be a huge impact. The utility can mandate where the AC disconnect can go. And for some clients, that having the meter out at the pole on the street and having to put the disconnect for the system out there can be an exorbitant cost. This is more on the residential side than on the commercial side that I work in. But that can be a prohibitive expense for the system. And I know John will talk about some examples of that as well. And then a big one is multiple meters, and this is big in the commercial world. I'll work with a property that has 5 or 6 different meters on site, and instead of being able to interconnect into one meter and pooling those meters together and doing some kind of billing on the back end, we have to interconnect to every single meter, which is obviously a large expense for the client. So these are some of the impacts that we see from different net metering or interconnection paperwork, which are very tied together on how it affects the ROI. So for solar advocates, New Mexico is considered the best market in the country at the current moment. They have a one-to-one utility exchange, no credit exemption, or expiration. So basically they never expire. Utility-friendly implement policy, so we're able to connect very easily. There's 100% offset, so they allow you to connect a solar system to the grid that offsets 100% of your usage versus having a finite cap of, say, 100 kW or some other cap for the interconnection or net metering. And then strong clean energy mandates. Most of the states with progressive net metering policies also have really strong mandates of their renewable energy makeup that they have in their grid. I believe in New Mexico, it's for 2050. And then stable investment for investment for solar companies. So if the market's consistent, it's not changing a lot, that allows investors to come in. Commercial solar projects and utility scale projects take a really long time to develop. And the last thing you want to have is that policy change in the middle of that development process. So this allows for people to come in and apply some investment dollars and have confidence that that project will move forward. So Illinois is considered the fifth hottest solar market in the country at the moment. So a lot of the solar companies in the St. Louis region, most of the work we're currently doing is in Illinois. It's a very strong local incentive programs. Small utilities are pushing back in different ways. Some of the smaller utilities have caps at 25 kilowatt interconnection, that kind of thing. They do have a concept called virtual net metering, which allows for community solar or multi-metering aggregate, like I was talking about, where you can have a large system and virtually they're doing the billing or the crediting kind of on the accounting side instead of having the actual physical interconnection to the meter, which allows for a lot of large community solar system development and something that we're actively pushing for in Missouri as well. They have switched away from for DS1 and DS2 clients in the Ameren, Illinois area, and this is across all of Illinois for ComEd as well, that they are getting rid of net metering from a one-to-one relationship, and it is now switching to more of what net billing is, where they are getting just the supply charge versus getting the distribution and all that included, or the production and all that included in the net metering. Ameren is very kind of progressive in that sense when it comes to solar. So one of the incentives that is there is called the Smart Inverter Rebate. This allows the utility to help throttle production to create some grid stability. And so they have, the client is signing permission for Ameren to be able to help throttle the production so that there's no peak power issues or anything like that. And they get a check up front for installing a meter that complies with that. I mean, sorry, an inverter that complies with that rebate policy. So one really nice incentive from the utility there. So is this kind of a sales or consulting position? What does this mean? Kind of our day-to-day, we spend a lot of time researching. Before I can go into a new market, I have to fully understand what that net metering policy looks like so that I can portray what a true ROI would be to the client. Usage analysis, so typically putting some kind of meter on the property or digging into the actual hourly data for demand charge with the client. Demand charge is not very, it can't be really easily offset with solar. And so making sure that we size the system correctly and understand how we are impacting the demand charge and comparing that to the usage of the production of the system versus their demand usage. Interconnection approval can take up to 90 days. Sometimes there's utility upgrades, and on the commercial side, they can be pretty significant. Then we come back, we redesign based on the utility's basic preferences or suggestions on how we can interconnect. Have to typically readjust the client's expectations at that point. Then we go to install, and then there's sometimes a 30-day time to wait before we get permission to turn on the system to be able to operate. So working with the utility, understanding the net metering policy is a critical aspect of painting a realistic picture for the commercial client. And so it is very consultative, a lot of education, and a ton of research before you can just go into a new market and be able to sell successfully. So what's next? Inherently, as batteries are getting cheaper, we are looking at more behind the meter storage. There are a lot of microgrid studies going on right now. I know in Illinois, some of the municipalities are looking at how they can just become their own independent microgrid, spending a lot of money to be able to do research and studies on how to go about that. The battery can help with demand charge. So if you know at a certain point your batteries are full and you're kind of asking for a lot of power as you're flipping on equipment in your factory, you can release some of that battery from, or some of the power from that battery to help offset that demand charge. And it also can help with time of use. This is, energy arbitrage. So you're storing it when the power is cheap, and you're pushing it back to the grid when the power is more expensive. And then currently, in Missouri and in the area, the batteries are still pretty expensive. So it's kind of hard to show the ROI return for it. So in my mind, advocacy, getting good net metering policies, and working with the utility still our best option, and still the most energy efficient approach to doing solar interconnection. And then I always just like to kind of show what's next in the world. This is basically gravitational batteries. So as the solar is charging this gravitational battery, it's pulling weights up a crane. And then at the end of the day and at night, it lowers the weights, turning a turbine and pushing that power out to the grid. So they're starting to look at even other ways of storing energy outside of lithium batteries. There's examples where they're using cave shafts where they can lower the weight down into the cave during the day. And then raise the weight in the cave during the day. And then at night, it lowers back down, driving that turbine to produce the energy. So I'm going to hand it off to John, who's going to give us kind of a state of where we are with policy in Missouri and some other states around the area.